The Hells Angels biker saw a little girl dragged into the woods, and his response terrified the men who took her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. On a cold and misty evening, the woods surrounding the small town were eerily quiet, save for the sound of branches cracking underfoot. A young girl, no more than 7 years old, was being dragged through the underbrush by two men whose faces were hidden by the shadows of the trees. Her cries echoed through the night air, filled with fear and desperation. She kicked and struggled, but the men's grip was unrelenting. The situation was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. In the distance, the sound of a roaring motorcycle cut through the silence, growing louder with each passing second. It was Jake Reaper Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, known for his intimidating presence and unflinching resolve. His leather jacket flapped in the wind as he sped down the winding dirt road, his mind focused on the ride, the rush of the road, the peace it brought him. But then, as he rounded a bend, his headlights illuminated the scene ahead. The sight of the little girl struggling to break free from the grasp of the two men sent a jolt through him. He slowed his bike and instinctively knew he had to intervene. Without a second thought, Jake gunned the engine and surged forward, his bike roaring to life like a beast unleashed. The men heard the motorcycle approaching, but it was too late. In a flash, Jake reached them, his massive form jumping off the bike with the speed and precision of a man who had lived a life full of danger. The men froze, taken aback by the sight of the biker, his face hidden beneath his helmet, but his body language speaking volumes. He was a force to be reckoned with. Jake's voice, low and commanding, echoed through the woods. As he stepped toward the men, "Let her go," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the air like a knife. The men hesitated for a moment, sizing him up. They had no idea who he was, but they could feel the danger radiating from him. Without warning, one of the men lunged at Jake, thinking he could overpower him. But Jake was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed the man by the collar and threw him aside like a rag doll. The second man reached for a knife, but before he could even draw it, Jake's fist collided with his jaw with a sickening thud. The man collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Jake turned to the little girl, who was trembling in fear, her wide eyes filled with tears. "It's okay, kid," Jake said gently, his voice softening for the first time. "You're safe now." The girl looked up at him, her body still shaking, but the fear in her eyes slowly began to fade as she realized she wasn't in danger anymore. She nodded, wiping her tears away. But Jake didn't leave her side just yet. He picked her up carefully and walked back toward his motorcycle. "I'm taking you home," he said, his tone firm but kind. As they left the woods behind, the quiet of the night returned, but something had changed. The little girl had been saved, and Jake had once again found himself on the path of redemption, his heart softened by the innocence he had just protected. But the men he had defeated were not just any criminals. As Jake rode off into the night, he had no idea that this simple act of bravery would lead him into a much darker and dangerous web of intrigue that would change his life forever. As Jake rode through the night, the sound of the motorcycle's engine faded into the distance, leaving behind the stillness of the woods. The little girl, now safe in his arms, clung to him, her small hands tightly gripping his jacket. Her shivers were still present, but they had softened. It was as if the warmth of his presence was slowly calming the fear that had overtaken her just moments before. The stars above twinkled softly, their cold light casting long shadows on the road ahead. Jake's mind raced, but for the first time in a long while. It wasn't with thoughts of violence or old grudges. Instead, it was filled with the image of the terrified little girl and the sense of responsibility that now sat heavy on his shoulders. They had driven for what seemed like hours, and Jake finally reached a small cabin on the edge of town, tucked away between the trees. It was modest, but for Jake, it had been a refuge during the worst times of his life. The cabin was simple, just a few rooms, a kitchen, and a small living space that Jake had furnished over the years with only the essentials. He'd never wanted anything more. His life had been filled with chaos, and he had no desire to complicate it further. He parked the bike by the porch, helping the girl down gently, making sure she could stand on her own 2 feet before guiding her inside. As they entered, the warmth of the cabin hit them. The smell of burning wood from the fireplace filled the room, offering a sense of comfort. Jake motioned for the girl to sit on the couch while he stoked the fire, adding a few more logs to ensure they would stay warm through the night. His movements were calm, but inside, he was a storm. He kept thinking about the men who had taken the girl. Who were they? What did they want with her? And why did they look so familiar? He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no random act, that there was something more to it than just 2 men trying to abduct a helpless child. He turned to the girl, who had curled up on the couch, her eyes still wide with fear. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, kneeling down beside her. She nodded, her lips trembling, but no words came out. Jake didn't push her to speak. He knew how to read people, and sometimes, silence was more telling than anything anyone could say. Instead, he handed her a blanket and sat down beside her, waiting. The fire crackled in the background, filling the room with a comforting rhythm. Finally, the girl spoke, her voice small and fragile. "They wanted to hurt me," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "But you stopped them." Jake felt a tightness in his chest. The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd seen violence, brutality, and the darkest sides of humanity for most of his life, but he had never been the one to protect someone, not like this. He had always been the one causing fear, not stopping it. The girl's words echoed in his mind. They wanted to hurt me. He had to know more, had to understand why they targeted her. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the flames. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of knocking on the door. A sharp knock, like someone who was waiting for a response. Jake stood up quickly, motioning for the girl to stay where she was. He grabbed a bat from behind the door, a precaution he always took. He walked slowly toward the door, listening carefully for any sound. The knock came again, this time louder. Jake's heart raced. Could it be them? Could the men have followed them here? He opened the door with a swift motion, his hand tightening around the bat. But to his surprise, it wasn't the men who had abducted the girl. It was a stranger, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and tired eyes. He had the look of someone who had been through his own battles, someone who had lived in the shadows for far too long. "Are you Jake Morrison?" the man asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Jake didn't answer right away. He studied the man carefully. He didn't recognize him, but there was something about him that made Jake wary. "Who's asking?" Jake replied, his grip on the bat tightening slightly. The man stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble, Jake. I need your help." Jake's eyes narrowed. Help? He didn't know anyone anything anymore, especially not after everything that had happened. He had his own problems to deal with. But there was something in the man's eyes that made Jake hesitate. "What kind of help?" Jake asked, still cautious. The man glanced over his shoulder nervously, his voice dropping even lower. "The girl you just saved, she's in more danger than you realize. And I think you're the only one who can help her." The words hung in the air like a threat. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Who was this man? And how did he know about the girl? He had to find out more. Jake motioned for the man to come inside. "Talk," he said simply. I sat in the dimly lit cabin, the flickering fire casting long shadows on the walls. The man in front of me was silent now, waiting for me to process what he had just said. The girl, she was in danger, and I was the one who could help her. My mind was racing as I turned the man's words over in my head. Who was he, really? Why had he come to me? What danger was the girl really in? He didn't look like someone who was just passing through. His face was worn, his clothes plain but practical. The lines on his face told stories of hardship and survival. "What do you know about the girl?" I finally asked, my voice low but firm. The man glanced at the door, as if making sure no one was listening. "She's not just any kid. Her parents were involved in something big. The people after her aren't just criminals. They're connected to something much more dangerous." I narrowed my eyes. "What are you talking about? Who's after her?" The man sighed, rubbing his tired face with one hand. "I don't have all the details, but I know enough. These people, whoever they are, will stop at nothing to get to her. And you're the only one who can help." I stood up and walked toward the window, staring out into the cold, dark night. The wind howled outside, and the trees bent under the pressure of the storm. I could feel my heart racing, my mind grappling with the idea that I had just gotten involved in something far bigger than I had imagined. I wasn't in the business of saving people. I had enough of my own demons to deal with. But there was something about this girl, something about her that made me want to protect her. I had saved her once, and now it seemed like I couldn't turn my back on her. "Tell me what you know," I said, turning back to face the man. He hesitated, clearly torn about how much to reveal. But after a moment, he nodded and spoke. "Her name is Lily. She's the daughter of a man who used to be in the same circle as you. A long time ago, he was involved in something that went wrong. The kind of thing that leaves a trail of bodies behind it. After that, he disappeared, and Lily was raised by her mother. But now, it looks like her father's past has come back to haunt her. The people after her, they think she knows something. They'll kill her to keep it quiet." My blood ran cold. I had heard stories about men like that. The kind who did things in the shadows and left no trace. I had been one of those men once. But hearing it now, it made me sick. I didn't want any part of it. But that little girl had a target on her back. A target that I had unwittingly made bigger when I saved her. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to process everything. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. The man stood up, stepping closer to me. "I want you to protect her. Keep her safe. These people won't stop until they have her. And if you don't do something, they'll come after her again, and this time, they'll finish what they started." I looked at him, a knot forming in my stomach. I didn't know anyone anything. I didn't want to get involved in this mess. But I couldn't ignore the look in the girl's eyes. The look of someone who had seen too much too soon. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "Where is she now?" I asked. The man's eyes darkened. "She's at a safe house, but it won't stay safe for long. The people looking for her have eyes everywhere. They'll find her if we don't act fast." I nodded, my resolve hardening. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let anyone harm that little girl. I wasn't going to let her end up like me. I would do whatever it took to keep her safe. I grabbed my leather jacket from the back of the chair and pulled it on. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting. I wasn't just the biker anymore. I was something more. "Let's go," I said, my voice steady. The man nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Thank you," he said, though I wasn't sure if he meant it. I didn't need his thanks. I didn't need anything from him. I had a job to do. As I opened the door and stepped into the cold night, the wind hit me like a slap. It was time to go to work. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch anymore. I would find the people who were after her, and I would make sure they regretted ever coming after her. I wouldn't stop until Lily was safe, even if it meant facing the ghosts from my past. I had already walked through fire once, and I wasn't afraid to do it again. I stepped into the cold night air, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. The girl, Lily, was somewhere out there, hidden away in a safe house. But how long could it stay safe? The people after her were ruthless, and if I didn't act fast, they'd find her. I was no stranger to danger, but this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about her. I wasn't going to let anyone else suffer because of something they had no control over. I had lived a life of shadows, a life where I'd been the one causing fear. But now, the roles had reversed. I wasn't the one making people run in fear. I was the one protecting someone, keeping them safe. And that was something I wasn't sure I knew how to do. The man who had come to me with this story was waiting in the cabin, his face tense, clearly eager for me to make up my mind. I didn't need to say much. My actions spoke louder than words. I turned to him. "Where's the safe house?" I asked, my voice steady. "Not far," he replied, his eyes scanning the dark. "But it won't stay hidden for long. They know she's here. They know she's alive. It's just a matter of time before they come looking for her again." I nodded. "Let's go." We didn't waste any more time. The man led me out into the cold night, his steps quick and purposeful. We drove through the town, passing dimly lit houses and empty streets. It was eerie, almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. My mind raced as I thought about the men after the girl. I had seen their kind before. I knew what they were capable of. But what bothered me the most was how familiar they seemed. They weren't just random thugs. They were connected to something bigger, something darker. The girl had to know something. That's why they wanted her. As we drove, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of past she was running from. What kind of danger had her father left her with? And why hadn't he come back for her? I clenched my fists. The weight of this kid's life was now in my hands, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. We arrived at the safe house in under an hour, a small, nondescript house on the edge of town. The windows were dark, the door closed tight. It looked normal enough, but I could sense the tension in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I glanced around, checking for any sign of movement. "Stay close," I muttered to the man, and we approached the door. I knocked twice, then waited, my heart racing. A few seconds later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her 30s with a tired expression on her face. She was short, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, and her eyes darted between us, nervous. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could see the worry in her eyes, and I knew right then that she wasn't just hiding the girl. She was protecting her. "She's safe for now," I said, stepping inside. The woman nodded and let us in. The house was small, but it was warm, and it had a homey feel to it. There were toys scattered on the floor and a few family photos on the walls. It looked like a place where a child could feel safe. Lily was sitting on the couch in the living room, her small form curled up with a blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide, and she looked up at us with a mixture of fear and relief. When she saw me, her face softened, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw a small spark of trust in her eyes. "It's okay," I said gently, sitting down next to her. "You're safe now." She didn't respond, but I could tell she understood. I glanced over at the woman, who was watching us carefully. "Do you have everything you need?" I asked her. She nodded, but I could see the worry still etched on her face. "For now," she said quietly, "but I don't know how much longer we can keep her hidden. They're looking for her, and they won't stop until they find her." I felt a chill run through me. It was one thing to protect a child for a few days. It was another to keep her safe from people who wouldn't hesitate to kill her. I stood up, my mind made up. "We can't wait any longer," I said firmly. "I'll get her out of here. We'll move her somewhere safe." The woman's eyes widened. "You can't just take her away. They'll follow you. They'll find her." I looked at her, my gaze steady. "I know how to handle them," I said. "I'll make sure she's safe. But we can't wait for them to come to us. We need to act first." The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered. "I trust you." We gathered what little we could, packed up a bag for the girl, and quietly left the house. I kept a close eye on the road as we drove through the town, my instincts on high alert. I didn't trust anyone anymore, not after everything I'd been through. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let these people hurt Lily. Not while I was still breathing. I could feel the tension in the air as we sped through the dark streets, the sound of the motorcycle's engine roaring beneath us, the girl tightly holding onto my back. I had promised her she was safe, but the truth was, I wasn't sure how safe either of us were. The men after her were relentless, and we were just getting started. The plan was simple. Get her to the next safe house, get her off the radar for a while, and figure out what the hell we were dealing with. But that plan was already looking like it was going to fall apart. I glanced back at the girl, her face pale under the glow of the streetlights. She was still holding on, but her grip was loosening, her small body shaking against me. I could feel the fear radiating off of her. "Are you all right?" I called back over the noise of the bike. She didn't answer, but I could tell she was trying to keep it together. She had been through more than most adults could handle, and she was just a kid. I pushed the bike harder, trying to make up time. The sooner we got to safety, the better. I had no idea how long we had before the people after her caught up with us, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. As we passed through the outskirts of town, the lights of the city faded into the distance. The road ahead was dark, save for the occasional streetlight flickering overhead. I turned onto a smaller, less traveled road, hoping the change in direction would help throw anyone who might be following off our trail. But as I rode, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, scanning the shadows for any movement. It was then that I heard it, the sound of another engine. It wasn't close, but it was unmistakable. Someone else was on the road, and they were coming fast. I gritted my teeth and pushed the bike harder. We needed to get out of sight, and fast. I swerved onto a dirt road that led through a thick patch of trees, the tires kicking up dust behind us. The noise of the engine grew louder, and I could feel the vibrations of the approaching vehicle in my chest. My pulse quickened. They were getting closer. I could hear the sound of the bike's engine revving louder behind us, the screech of tires on the dirt road. Whoever it was, they were coming after us, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. I glanced back at the girl again, her eyes wide with terror. She had no idea what was going on, but I could see the panic in her face. I had to protect her, no matter what. I twisted the throttle, pushing the bike faster, weaving through the trees as best as I could. The bike's engine roared in protest as I pushed it harder, but it held steady beneath me. We couldn't outrun them on this road, not with the way they were gaining. I needed a plan, and fast. I spotted a small cabin in the distance, tucked away among the trees. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I made a sharp turn and headed toward the cabin, hoping we could get there before the other bike caught up. The cabin was old, run down, but it had a roof, walls, and a place to hide. I wasn't sure how long it would hold up, but it was our best shot. As we reached the cabin, I slammed on the brakes and skidded to a stop in front of the porch. I grabbed the girl by the arm and pulled her off the bike. "Get inside now," I barked at her. She hesitated for a moment, her fear holding her in place, but then she nodded and ran inside the cabin. I followed close behind, my senses on high alert. I didn't have time to think about what came next. The sound of the approaching bike was louder now, and I knew they were almost here. I locked the door behind me, making sure it was secure. The girl was already huddled in the corner of the cabin, her face buried in her hands, shaking. I couldn't blame her. I was shaking too, but I had to keep it together. We weren't safe yet. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, trying to make sure nothing would get through. The walls were thin, the windows barely held together, but it would have to do. I looked at the girl. "Stay quiet, stay hidden," I whispered. She nodded, her small body trembling. I could hear the sound of the other bike's engine, now right outside the cabin. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The door rattled. The sound of a fist pounding against the wood made my stomach turn. "We know you're in there," a voice called out, rough and menacing. It was one of the men from earlier. They had found us. I could feel the girl's eyes on me, and I knew she was terrified. The pounding on the door grew louder, more frantic. I had no choice now. I had to fight, no matter what it took. I turned to the girl, trying to put on a brave face. "You stay here, okay? Don't make a sound." She nodded, but I could see the fear still in her eyes. I had to end this. I grabbed the bat I had kept with me for years, its cold metal reassuring in my hands. I stepped to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The men outside wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her, not while I still had breath in my lungs. I stood in the dimly lit cabin, my back pressed against the door as the pounding from the other side grew louder. I could hear their voices now, shouting orders, demanding to be let in. There was no escape this time. I gripped the bat in my hands, the weight of it heavy but comforting. I could feel the adrenaline surging through me as my mind raced. The girl, Lily, was still huddled in the corner, her small frame trembling with fear. I had promised to protect her, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep that promise. I could hear the men's voices from outside, taunting me, threatening to break through the door. They weren't going to give up. They weren't going to leave until they got what they wanted. I had to think fast. I couldn't fight them all off, not without backup, not without more weapons. But I wasn't about to just sit here and wait for them to come for us. I had to buy us some time. I glanced around the room, scanning for anything that could help. There were old shelves, some broken furniture, and a fireplace, but nothing that could stop them from getting in. The door was solid, but it wouldn't hold forever. I turned back to Lily. She was still watching me, her wide eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. I couldn't imagine what she had been through already, and now she was trapped with me in this cabin, with no way out. I needed to keep her safe. "Stay here," I told her in a low voice, trying to sound as calm as possible. "Whatever happens, don't make a sound. Do you understand?" She nodded quickly, though I could tell she wasn't sure if she could do what I was asking of her. But there was no time to reassure her. I could hear the men starting to push harder on the door. It was only a matter of time before they got through. I moved quietly to the window, peeking through the blinds. It was dark outside, but I could just make out the silhouette of the men standing in front of the cabin. They were armed. I could see the glint of metal in their hands. They were ready for a fight, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them all on my own. But there was no turning back now. I turned away from the window and grabbed my leather jacket from the chair. I needed to make a plan. Fast. The door shuttered again, and I could feel the vibrations in the floor. They were getting closer. I didn't have much time. I moved to the back of the cabin and started rummaging through the old furniture. There had to be something here I could use. My fingers brushed against an old, rusty pipe wrench. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. I grabbed it and held it tightly in my hands. At least it was something solid. I went back to the window and peeked out again. The men were still there, waiting. They were trying to figure out their next move, but I knew they wouldn't give up. They wanted Lily, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get her. I didn't know who they were, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't leaving without a fight. I looked at the girl once more, my heart heavy. She had been through so much already, and I wasn't sure how much more she could take. I had to protect her, no matter what. The door shook again, this time with more force. They were breaking it down. I stepped back, taking a deep breath. There was no time to waste. I had to act now. I moved quickly to the door and stood with my back to it, gripping the pipe wrench in one hand. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to the men outside, their voices growing louder. They were about to come through. I could hear the sound of wood splintering as they forced the door open. My mind went blank for a moment. Then, just as the door gave way, I swung the wrench at the first man who came through. The impact was solid, and he staggered back, but he didn't go down. The others were right behind him, pushing their way inside. I fought back with everything I had, swinging the wrench, trying to keep them at bay. The men were stronger, but I was fueled by something else, desperation, the need to protect the girl behind me. The fight seemed to drag on forever, but finally, I saw an opening. I rushed forward, knocking one of the men to the ground, and slammed the door shut behind me. I quickly bolted it. My breath came in short gasps, my body aching from the fight. I turned back to Lily, who was now standing in the middle of the cabin, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. I moved toward her, trying to steady my breathing. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She nodded slowly, but her fear was still palpable. I knew we couldn't stay here much longer. The men wouldn't give up, and I had to get her out of here. I grabbed her hand and led her toward the back door. It was our only chance. We had to get to safety before they realized what had happened. I looked back once more at the cabin, knowing that whatever happened next, I wasn't leaving without her. The storm was still raging outside, but the cold air felt like a small relief. We were out of the cabin, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. I moved swiftly, leading Lily through the back door of the cabin. The cold wind cut through the night, but it didn't bother me. I had bigger problems to focus on. I could hear the men outside, their voices growing angrier, more desperate. They weren't going to give up. I needed to get Lily out of here before they figured out where we'd gone. The woods were dense and dark, but it was our only chance. I kept a firm grip on her hand as we moved quickly between the trees. I didn't look back, but I could feel their eyes on me, like shadows in the distance, following our every step. I kept the pace fast, my heart racing, my mind working to anticipate what would come next. Every crack of a branch, every rustling of the leaves made me jump, but I couldn't afford to show fear. Not now. Not when she was depending on me. I glanced down at Lily. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, but she was still moving, still trying to keep up with me. I could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else, something that gave me hope. She was stronger than I thought. She didn't say a word, but I could feel her trust in me. That was all I needed. We pushed through the trees, the snow crunching under our boots, the wind howling louder with each passing second. I knew we were running out of time. The men wouldn't stop, not until they had her. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. They were dangerous. I had dealt with people like them before. I had lived that life. But I wasn't that man anymore. I couldn't let them hurt her. I couldn't let her become another victim. As we moved deeper into the woods, I spotted an old cabin in the distance. It was barely visible in the dark, but it was better than nothing. We needed shelter, even if it was temporary. I pulled Lily toward the cabin, my pace quickening. It was a small, run-down place, no more than a shack really, but it would do. I knocked softly on the door, trying to make as little noise as possible. There was a long pause before the door creaked open. A man appeared in the doorway, his face covered in stubble, his eyes tired but alert. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a heavy jacket and boots, and when he saw me, his expression shifted. "What the hell are you doing here?" he growled, looking at me suspiciously. "You got a place to hide?" I asked, not waiting for a formal greeting. His eyes darted to Lily, who was standing behind me, still trembling with fear. Without a word, he stepped aside and gestured for us to come in. You're lucky I'm not asking too many questions, he muttered, closing the door behind us. I didn't need to know who this man was or why he had this cabin, but I was thankful he had opened the door. I led Lily inside, and we quickly took shelter. The man lit a small lamp on the table, casting a weak light around the room. The place was cold, but at least it was safe for now. I could hear the wind howling outside, the storm growing stronger by the minute. Lily sat on the floor, her back pressed against the wall. She had stopped shaking, but I could tell she was exhausted. I walked over to her, crouching down to her level. We'll be okay, I said, my voice as calm as I could make it. Just stay here for a while. I need to figure out what to do next. Lily nodded, her eyes still wide with fear, but she said nothing. She was tired, too tired to speak, too tired to understand what was really happening. I couldn't explain it all to her. I could only promise her that I would protect her, no matter what. I turned to the man who had helped us. He was standing near the window, peering out into the night, his face grim. You don't know what you're running from, do you? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of the question in the air. You can't stay here long, he said, turning back to face me. They'll find you. You need to keep moving. I clenched my fists, frustration building up inside me. I know, I muttered. But where can we go? We can't outrun them forever. The man's eyes softened, just for a moment. I might know someone, he said, his voice low. Someone who can help. I looked at him, hoping for some kind of answer, some kind of plan. But I knew better than to trust anyone without knowing the full story. Still, I didn't have any other options. Who? I asked, my voice tense. The man glanced at Lily, then back at me. A friend of mine, he said. Someone who owes me a favor. But it's risky. If you trust me, I'll take you to him. He might be able to keep her safe. I hesitated. The risk was huge, but we didn't have much time. I didn't have a choice. Let's go, I said, grabbing Lily's hand once again. She didn't protest. She was too tired, too scared to argue. But I knew she was trusting me, and I wasn't going to let her down. We gathered our things, and the man led us out into the stormy night once again. The wind howled louder, the snow blinding as we walked through the trees, trying to stay as hidden as possible. The sound of the storm was deafening, but I kept my focus on the path ahead. We had one shot at this, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I kept my head low, moving quickly through the woods, trying to keep Lily close. The man who had offered his help led us through the dense trees, his boots crunching on the snow-covered ground. The wind howled above us, the storm making it harder to see more than a few feet ahead. But we kept moving, driven by the need to get to safety. My mind raced, and every step I took felt like it brought me closer to a danger I could feel, but couldn't see. The world had changed in an instant. One moment, I was a biker living for the thrill of the ride, and the next, I was in the middle of a fight for a life I hadn't planned on saving. And yet, here I was, walking through a storm to keep a little girl safe. I glanced down at Lily, who was walking beside me, her hand still tightly clutching mine. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she was doing her best to keep up. I knew she was scared. I could see it in her eyes. Hell, I was scared too, but I couldn't let her see that. I had to keep it together. We're almost there, the man said, his voice low, trying to reassure us. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how much I believed him. The path ahead was unclear, and the darkness of the storm didn't help. I wasn't used to walking in this kind of weather, but we couldn't afford to waste time. As we walked, the wind seemed to pick up, the trees creaking and groaning under the pressure. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My senses were heightened, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I kept looking over my shoulder. But all I could see were the swirling shadows of the storm. How much farther? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Not far, the man replied, though his tone had a note of uncertainty to it. Just stay close. We pushed on through the trees, moving faster now. The storm was getting worse, the snow swirling around us like a thick blanket. I could barely make out the figure of the man in front of me, and I knew. Lily was struggling to keep up, but she was still with me, and that was all that mattered. The wind howled louder, and I could hear the sound of the man's footsteps growing louder as we neared something. Through the heavy snowfall, I finally saw it, an old, run-down cabin, barely visible against the backdrop of the storm. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was better than nothing. Here, the man said, gesturing toward the cabin. I didn't hesitate. We made our way toward it. our footsteps muffled by the thick blanket of snow. I could feel the tension in my chest ease just a little as we reached the door. The man knocked 3 times, and the door creaked open slowly. A woman stood in the doorway, her face lined with age and worry. Her expression softened as she saw the man, and she stepped aside, allowing us to enter. "You brought them here?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. The man nodded. "It's the best we can do for now," he said, looking at me for reassurance. I glanced at Lily, whose face was still pale and tired. She looked like she was about to collapse, and I knew we couldn't stay out in the cold for much longer. I led her inside, the warmth of the cabin immediately wrapping around us like a blanket. The woman closed the door behind us, and I heard the sound of the wind grow quieter. I looked around. The cabin was small, rustic, but it felt safe. There was a fireplace crackling softly in the corner, casting a warm glow over the room. I could see a small kitchen to one side, a few chairs, and a table covered in papers. It was the kind of place that seemed to hold secrets, the kind of place people ran to when they had nowhere else to go. The woman motioned for us to sit by the fire. I led Lily to one of the chairs and helped her settle down. "Thank you," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure if it was enough. "You're welcome," the woman replied, her eyes kind but guarded. She glanced at the man who had brought us here, then back at me. "You're not safe here for long," she said, her voice low. "They'll come looking for you, and this cabin won't keep you hidden." "For long." I nodded, knowing she was right. I didn't know who the men were, but I knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And right now, what they wanted was Lily. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice tense. The man and the woman exchanged a glance before the man spoke. "There's someone who might be able to help you," he said slowly. "But it's risky. It's going to take time, and we'll need to move quickly." I didn't care how risky it was. If there was a chance to keep Lily safe, I was willing to do whatever it took. "Where do we go?" I asked, standing up. The woman glanced toward the door. "We need to get to the city," she said. "There's someone there who can protect her. But we'll have to move fast. They won't stop looking for her." I nodded, a sense of urgency flooding through me. We couldn't stay here for long. The storm was still raging outside, but I knew what we had to do. We had to keep moving. "Let's go," I said, turning toward Lily. She looked up at me, her tired eyes still filled with fear, but also trust. I wasn't sure how much longer I could protect her, but I wasn't going to stop trying. Not now. Not ever. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The storm outside had worsened, snow swirling violently, cutting visibility down to nearly nothing. But inside the cabin, there was an odd sense of quiet. Quiet except for the sound of the fire crackling in the corner and Lily's soft, almost imperceptible breaths as she tried to rest. I watched her for a moment. She was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally too. I could tell she was trying to be brave, but how could she not be scared? She was just a little girl. I had promised her I would keep her safe, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could protect her if they found us here. The cabin, despite the warmth of the fire and the brief sense of refuge, wouldn't be enough to hide us forever. The men who were after her were relentless, and I knew they had resources, connections, and experience in tracking people down. I couldn't risk staying here. I had to act. I looked at the woman, who had been quietly sitting by the fire, keeping her eyes trained on us. She seemed calm, but there was something in her eyes, a deep knowing that matched the tension in the air. "How soon can we leave?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She looked up at me, almost as if considering my question for a moment. "We can leave now if you're ready, but you need to be prepared. The road ahead won't be easy." I nodded. We had no other choice. I wasn't going to let Lily become another casualty of something bigger than either of us could control. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside of me. The woman stood up, moving toward a small cupboard where she kept a few supplies. She grabbed a backpack, shoved a few items inside, and handed it to me. "Take this. You'll need it." I took the bag without question. Inside was some food, a few water bottles, and a couple of blankets. Nothing extravagant, but it was enough to get us through the next part of the journey. I turned to Lily, who was now sitting up, her small face filled with confusion and fear. She didn't understand the gravity of the situation yet, but I could see it in her eyes. She trusted me. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "We have to go now, kid," I said softly, crouching down beside her. "I know it's scary, but you're safe with me." We're going to get through this. She nodded, her lip quivering slightly as she stood and walked to my side. I took her hand again, and we made our way out of the cabin. The woman closed the door behind us, and we stepped back into the storm. The cold hit us like a wall, but I wasn't worried about the weather. I was more concerned about the footsteps that could be following us through the snow. We moved quickly, but quietly, weaving between trees and using the cover of the storm to our advantage. The road was treacherous, and the snow made it even more difficult to navigate. But we kept going, one foot in front of the other, not daring to stop until we were out of the woods. The woman, who had been leading the way, glanced back over her shoulder. "We'll be at the checkpoint soon. Once we're there, you'll be safer." I didn't know what she meant by checkpoint, but I wasn't about to argue. All I cared about was getting Lily to safety. We walked for what seemed like hours, the storm pushing us back with every step. The wind cut through my jacket, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, but we couldn't afford to stop. The feeling of being hunted, the sense that someone was always a step behind us, was starting to eat away at me. I could feel it in my gut. I didn't trust that we were safe. Not yet. The snow was deep, and I could hear the crunch of footsteps in the distance. I froze, holding my breath. The woman ahead of me didn't seem to hear it, but I was sure we weren't alone. "Stay close," I whispered to Lily, pulling her in front of me as I surveyed the path ahead. But the footsteps were getting closer, too close for comfort. We had to move. Fast. I grabbed Lily's hand and broke into a sprint, the woman right behind us. The snow was thick, but I pushed through it, not looking back. I could hear the footsteps now, unmistakable, echoing through the trees. They were right behind us. The chase had begun. We ran through the snow, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning from the effort. I didn't know how long we could keep this up, but I knew we had no choice. The checkpoint couldn't be far now. I had to believe that. But the sound of the footsteps grew louder, and I realized we were being cornered. There was no way out. No escape. I had one option left, stand and fight. We reached a small clearing, and I stopped, turning to face the oncoming threat. The woman and Lily stopped too, both of them looking at me with wide, uncertain eyes. I took a deep breath, pulling Lily behind me, positioning myself between her and the approaching figures. My heart was pounding in my chest. I wasn't a fighter by nature, but when it came to protecting this girl, I would do whatever it took. The figures emerged from the shadows. 3 men, their faces hidden by the hoods of their jackets. One of them stepped forward, his voice low but threatening. "Give her to us," he said, his tone cold. "We won't ask again." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, waiting. The storm howled around us, and the tension in the air was suffocating. I was ready to do whatever it took to keep her safe, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold them off. This was the moment I had been waiting for, fight or die, and I wasn't going down without a fight. I tightened my grip on the makeshift weapon, my pulse thudding in my ears as the 3 men stepped into the clearing. The wind howled around us, the storm relentless as snowflakes whipped through the trees. I could feel Lily's small hands trembling behind me, her presence grounding me in this nightmare. I couldn't let them take her. I wasn't sure what they wanted, but I knew one thing: they weren't going to get her. The man in the front, taller than the others, took a step forward, his voice dripping with venom. "We've been tracking her for weeks. She doesn't belong here. Hand her over, and we can make this easy. Otherwise, it'll get messy." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. My body tensed, ready for whatever came next. The woman who had helped us looked at me, her eyes full of worry, but I could see the trust in them. She stepped back, pulling Lily closer to her side. This was my fight now. I wasn't a soldier anymore, but I knew how to handle myself. The men were armed, their hands twitching toward their weapons, but I had the advantage of surprise. I swung the wrench at the closest man. He dodged, but just barely, and I could see the flash of his knife in the low light. I had no idea if I could take them all on, but I had no choice. I swung again, this time connecting with his arm. The man grunted, stumbling back. The others moved, closing in. My heart was pounding as I tried to anticipate their next move. I didn't have a gun, but I had my fists, and I wasn't afraid to use them. The second man lunged at me, but I sidestepped, knocking him off balance. I could see the panic in his eyes as he struggled to regain his footing. I didn't hesitate. I took a step forward and kicked him in the chest, sending him crashing into a nearby tree. But the third man was already behind me. I turned just in time to see him swing a fist toward my head. I blocked it with my arm, but the impact sent a shockwave through my body. The man was stronger than I had anticipated, and I could feel the pain in my ribs as I staggered back. I needed to think fast. My only chance was to keep them off balance, keep them guessing. I ducked low, sweeping my leg out and knocking the third man's feet out from under him. He hit the ground with a loud thud, but he wasn't out. I could see him reaching for something, his gun. I didn't have much time. I lunged forward, grabbing a thick branch from the ground, and swung it at him. It connected with his arm, sending the gun flying from his grasp. I didn't stop there. I stepped on his wrist, pinning him to the ground as I brought the branch down on his chest. He gasped for breath, his eyes wide with shock. The fight had gone quiet for a moment, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. The first man I had hit was already back on his feet, his hand clutching his side where I had struck him with the wrench. I knew I had to end this now. I grabbed the knife from the second man, who was still struggling to stand, and held it up, ready to defend myself. But just as I was about to strike, I heard a sound from the woods. A vehicle engine. It was distant, but it was getting closer. The men froze, their eyes darting toward the noise. I used the opportunity to make my move. I rushed toward the second man, kicking him in the chest as I grabbed Lily's hand. "Run!" I shouted to the woman, who was still standing by the edge of the clearing. She nodded, her face pale with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed Lily and ran toward the tree line, disappearing into the night. I kept my eyes on the men, who were now turning to face me. They weren't done. They wouldn't give up. But I couldn't let them win. Not now. I took one last look at the clearing, then turned and sprinted after the woman and Lily, my legs burning with the effort. The snow made it difficult to run, but I pushed forward, knowing that if I slowed down, we'd be caught. We reached the tree line and kept going, the sound of the engine getting louder behind us. The woman and Lily were ahead, but they were slowing down too. They weren't used to running in this kind of weather, and I could see the exhaustion in the woman's face. I couldn't let them get caught. I pushed forward, my breath coming in heavy gasps. We needed to find shelter again. The storm was starting to take its toll on me, but I wasn't about to stop. I couldn't afford to. The sound of the engine was almost upon us now, and I knew we didn't have much time. "This way," I said, grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her toward a small cave I had spotted earlier. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for the moment. We all ducked inside, the cold biting at our faces as we huddled together. I could hear the engine stop just outside the trees, and I knew we were running out of time. The men were closing in, but this time, they weren't going to find us. At least, not yet. We had a little more time. But I knew that time was running out. I sat in the cave, the cold stone biting at my skin as I listened to the storm rage outside. Lily was tucked against the woman, her small body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. I kept my eyes trained on the entrance, my senses heightened. The engine noise had stopped, but I knew that wouldn't last long. The men were out there, and they were still looking for us. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as the sound of the wind howling outside seemed to fill every inch of the space. I could hear Lily's shallow breathing as she rested against the woman. She had fallen asleep, or at least she appeared to be, but I knew better than to think we were out of danger. The woman, whose name I still didn't know, was watching me closely, her face drawn with worry. She had been quiet ever since we entered the cave, but I could tell she was just as on edge as I was. We all knew we were trapped here for the moment. There was nowhere else to go. I finally spoke, my voice low but steady. "How long do we have?" The woman glanced toward the entrance, her expression hard to read. "It's hard to say," she replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "If they haven't found us yet, it's only a matter of time before they do. The storm is covering our tracks, but that won't last long." I clenched my jaw, frustration bubbling up inside me. We had no more time to waste. The men wouldn't stop until they had Lily, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I turned my gaze to Lily. She was just a little girl, too young to be caught up in any of this. Too innocent. She didn't deserve any of it. I had to protect her. The woman noticed my gaze and sighed softly. "You care for her, don't you?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how to respond. The truth was, I hadn't expected to care. I had never been one to form attachments. I had lived my life in the shadows, keeping people at arm's length. But there was something about Lily. Something about her that made me want to protect her at all costs. "She's just a kid," I said, my voice tight. I'm not going to let them take her. The woman nodded, her eyes softening. I understand. You're doing the right thing. But we have to keep moving. I didn't argue. I knew she was right. We couldn't afford to sit here waiting for them to find us. I looked out toward the entrance again, the wind still howling outside. It felt like the storm was closing in on us, trapping us here. I could feel my heart racing, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I had made a promise to Lily, and I wasn't going to break it. I stood up, brushing the snow off my jacket. We need to get out of here, I said. We can't stay here. The woman stood up with me, glancing at Lily, who was still sleeping soundly. We can't take her with us. It's too dangerous. I shook my head. I'm not leaving her behind. We move together, or not at all. The woman looked at me for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. You're right. We don't have time to argue. But we need to be careful. They'll be looking for us. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, determination settling in my chest. We'll make it through. But we have to move now. We walked toward the cave entrance, the cold air biting at our faces as we stepped back into the storm. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind was relentless. I squinted through the thick snowflakes, trying to get a sense of where we were. There was no sign of the men yet, but I knew it wouldn't take long. We needed to find a way out, a place to hide before they caught up with us. I heard the woman's voice behind me. There's a cabin not far from here, she said. It's an old place, but it might provide some shelter. If we can make it there, we'll be safe for a while. I nodded, my pace quickening. We couldn't afford to waste time. I kept Lily close as we moved through the snow, my every step deliberate. The storm was getting worse, but I pushed forward, my eyes scanning the woods for any sign of movement. The wind howled in my ears, drowning out everything else. It felt like the world was closing in on us, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. We had to keep going. We reached the cabin after what felt like hours, the snow heavy beneath our feet. The woman knocked softly on the door, glancing around nervously. There was no answer, but I could hear faint movement inside. The door creaked open slowly, and a man appeared in the doorway. He looked at us with wary eyes, his face hidden beneath a thick beard. What do you want? He asked, his voice gruff. The woman spoke quickly, explaining who we were and why we needed shelter. The man hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Get inside, he muttered, his voice softer now. Quickly, we stepped into the cabin, the warmth from the fire inside immediately enveloping us. I closed the door behind us and turned to the man. Thank you, I said, my voice low. We don't have much time. He nodded, glancing out the window. I know, he said, but you're safe here, for now. I didn't feel safe, but I was willing to. Take it. We couldn't stay in the open any longer. This cabin, for all its flaws, was a temporary haven. I only hoped it would be enough to keep us hidden long enough to escape the storm and the men chasing us. I sat by the fire in the small cabin, the heat a welcome relief from the freezing cold outside. But inside, the tension was suffocating. Lily sat beside me, her head resting against the woman's shoulder, both of them exhausted after the grueling trek through the storm. The man who had helped us looked out the window, his face a mask of concentration as he scanned the snowy landscape. Every minute felt like an eternity. We weren't safe yet. The storm outside had been relentless, but the real danger wasn't the weather. It was the men who were hunting us. I could still hear their voices in my head, demanding Lily's surrender, threatening us with violence. They were close. I knew it. But I couldn't let them take her. Not after everything we had been through. The woman beside me finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. They're still looking for you, she said, her voice low but firm. They won't stop until they have her. And they're getting closer. I clenched my fists, frustration building in my chest. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice tight. We can't stay here forever. The man glanced back at me, his face grim. We won't stay here long. But the way out won't be easy. I didn't need him to tell me that. I had been in enough tight spots to know that getting away from people like them wasn't going to be a walk in the park. What's the plan? I asked. How do we get out of here? The woman stood up, moving over to a small wooden chest in the corner of the room. She opened it, revealing a few supplies, blankets, a few cans of food, and a couple of old maps. She pulled one out, spreading it across the table. There's a road through the woods, she said, tracing a path with her finger. It'll take us to a town about 30 miles from here. We can hide out there for a while. What's the catch? I asked. The catch is that it's not an easy road, she said, her eyes meeting mine. It's dangerous. Out there, especially with the storm. And we don't have much time. They're already out there, and they know we're here. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that they'll catch up to us. I knew she was right. We couldn't afford to waste any more time. We had to move, and we had to move fast. I turned to Lily, who was still sitting quietly beside the woman, her eyes wide and exhausted. I could see the fear in her face, but I also saw trust. She was depending on me, and I wasn't about to let her down. We'll make it through this, I said softly to her. Just stay close to me. We're going to get through this. She nodded, her small hand gripping mine. I felt a surge of protectiveness flood through me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her, and I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. The woman packed the supplies quickly, and we were ready to go. I glanced at the man, who was still keeping watch by the window. Stay alert, I said. They could be anywhere. He nodded, his hand resting on the door, ready to move. Let's go. We stepped outside into the night, the wind howling and the snow blinding us. The road was barely visible through the thick, swirling snow, but we had no choice but to follow it. The trees around us groaned in the wind, the world a blur of white. I kept Lily close, my hand still gripping hers tightly as we trudged through the snow, our boots sinking deep with every step. I kept my head on a swivel, scanning the woods for any sign of movement. We weren't far from the cabin, but I knew that didn't matter. The men were out there, and they were getting closer. I could feel the tension building, the weight of what we were doing pressing down on me. We weren't just running. We were fighting for survival. The woman led the way, her pace quick but steady, as she navigated the narrow path through the trees. I followed closely behind, Lily still clutching my hand. We moved as quickly as we could, but the storm was relentless, the wind cutting through our clothes like knives. The cold was unbearable, but we couldn't stop. The man kept an eye on the rear, his gaze constantly shifting as he scanned the woods. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made my heart race. We couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The path seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in around us as we made our way deeper into the woods. The snow was getting thicker, and the cold was beginning to bite even harder. We were nearing the edge of the woods when I heard it, the sound of a vehicle engine, distant at first, but growing closer. My heart skipped a beat. They're here, I muttered under my breath. The woman stopped in her tracks, her eyes wide with panic. We need to move. Now, she whispered urgently. We ran. I didn't know how much time we had, but I knew it wasn't long. I could hear the sound of the engine getting closer, and I could feel the weight of their presence behind us. We were being hunted, and the hunt was closing in fast. We reached a small clearing, but it wasn't enough. They were right behind us now. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. It was time to face them. I stopped, turning to face the approaching vehicle, my hand still gripping the wrench. It was the only thing I had to defend myself, but it was enough. The men were close now. There were 4 of them, all armed and dangerous. They stopped a few feet away, their eyes scanning the 3 of us. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. You've run far enough, he said. Give her to us, and we'll let you go. I didn't answer. I wasn't going to hand Lily over. Not now. Not ever. I stood firm, the snow swirling around us, the cold biting at my face. The 4 men had stopped just a few feet away, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the 3 of us. I gripped the wrench tightly, my knuckles white from the pressure. I wasn't going to back down, not when it came to protecting her. The leader of the group took a step forward, his voice as cold as the storm around us. Give her to us, and we'll let you go, he said, his eyes narrowed in a mix of impatience and danger. I didn't move. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm not giving her to you. Not now. Not ever. The man's eyes flashed with irritation. You don't have a choice, he sneered. You can't protect her forever. The storm won't save you, and neither will your little wrench. I didn't flinch. You underestimate her, I said, my voice low but full of resolve. You underestimate me. I could feel Lily's small hand gripping mine, her fingers cold but firm. She was scared, I could see that, but there was also something in her eyes now. Trust. She trusted me, and I wasn't going to let her down. The man took another step closer, his hand inching toward his gun. I didn't wait. I moved first. With all my strength, I swung the wrench at the man closest to me. He saw it coming and tried to dodge, but it was too late. The wrench connected with his shoulder, knocking him off balance. He staggered back, cursing under his breath, but I didn't stop. I pushed forward, knocking him to the ground. The other men reacted quickly, pulling their guns. I didn't have time to think. I moved in close, swinging the wrench again, this time catching another man in the stomach. He grunted, dropping his weapon as he fell to his knees. I took advantage of the moment and kicked the gun away. But there were still 2 men left, and they weren't giving up. I glanced at Lily, her face pale with fear, but I saw the determination in her eyes. She wasn't going to run, not anymore. She was with me. The leader of the group was still standing, and I could see the anger in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, not by someone like me. But it didn't matter. I wasn't going to back down. I lunged forward, grabbing the leader by the collar and slamming him into the snow-covered ground. His gun fell from his hand, and for a moment, we were face to face. "You're not getting her," I said, my voice low and steady. He sneered up at me, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "You think you're a hero?" he spat. "You're just a pawn in a game you don't understand. We're not leaving without her." I pressed harder, my knees on his chest, the weight of my body holding him down. "You've already lost," I said, my voice almost a whisper. But just as I thought it was over, I heard movement behind me. I turned just in time to see one of the remaining men charge at me. I barely had time to react before he slammed into me, knocking me off the leader. My body hit the ground with a heavy thud, the air forced out of my lungs. I gasped for breath, trying to push myself up, but the man was already on top of me, his hands around my neck, choking me. The pressure built, and my vision started to blur. But I wasn't done yet. I fought back, my hands grabbing at his wrists, trying to pry them off. I wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Not without a fight. With everything I had left, I used my legs to kick him off, sending him flying backwards into a tree. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for air, my head spinning. I saw Lily still standing by the woman, her wide eyes locked on me. I couldn't let her see me fall. I couldn't show her weakness. The final man, who had been standing off to the side, finally moved in, his gun raised. He aimed it at me, his finger on the trigger. But before he could fire, there was a loud noise, distant at first, but then closer. A vehicle engine. The man's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for a split second, his focus wavered. I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, knocking the gun out of his hand and tackling him to the ground. The 2 of us struggled, but I had the advantage now. I threw punch after punch until he stopped fighting back. His body went limp, and I quickly rolled off of him, panting heavily. I looked back at the other men. 2 of them were still on the ground, either unconscious or too hurt to fight. The leader, however, was getting to his feet, but he was slow now. He was starting to realize something. The storm had given me an advantage. It had hidden us long enough for me to make my stand. I stood up slowly, wiping the blood from my lip. "You're done," I said, my voice cold. He glared at me, his eyes burning with rage. But I didn't wait for him to make a move. I stepped back, grabbing Lily's hand, and motioned for the woman to follow me. We didn't have time for more fights. We had to go. I turned away, leading them into the woods, the sounds of the men fading behind us. It wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. We were still alive, and that was enough.